today is go through some of the questions that were posed in advance, and then we'll open it up to to any questions that you have. You can just pop them in the chat while I'm talking if you like, and then I may ask you to elaborate a little bit on the questions when we get to the end. So we got a bunch of questions that to start us out. The first one was on startups. The first several are on startups, and they have to do with the trade-off between fast growth and quality of services. Okay, and I think that's a very important trade-off to make, and there's a lot of nuances here. So there's really no one answer to this question about when should you launch or how much perfection should you seek. Although I would say many entrepreneurs err on the side of being too perfectionistic. So, but on the other hand, it does depend on how far away your technology is from the market. So if you want to read up on this, there's a whole literature called technology readiness levels. And technology readiness levels basically try and categorize like how far from market are you? So can you get it out there quickly? And then it depends also on the kinds of technology, what it's used for. For example, if it's something that's doing medical diagnoses, you probably want to be, you probably want to be a little bit more careful just throwing something out there to get into the market and get your customers than if it's something like a game that people play or something like that. So there's a wide range. So the farther you are from the market, the more difficult it is to actually launch. You probably have to actually improve the services quite a bit, especially if it's not scaling at first. You may have like a really, really minimalistic prototype which works well but doesn't work in a production environment. And so if that's the case, then getting it out there too early isn't great because it'll get you a bad reputation and you won't have a lot of good customer uptake. So from that point of view, it's better to go with something that's, if you happen to be in an area that happens to be closer to market, which is a higher technology readiness level, then you're more likely to want to focus on the growth element and getting it out there and fixing it as you go. Likewise, if it's not life-threatening, you can obviously beta test it and get it out there and try and focus on growth. In some cases, and this is also directly relevant to AI, there might be some what the people call data network effects or data effects, which is that once you get data out there and you start collecting data from customers, then that actually improves your prediction ability, and then that in turn makes it harder for competitors to copy you. So there's an example where if you knew you had a good data effect, and by the way, don't be too overly optimistic about it, but if you do have one, then getting it out a little on the earlier side rather than perfecting the service or increasing the quality of service might be more beneficial, because then you can turn around and having more customers and having growth will actually help you improve the service. So I say those are kind of big things to think about when you're trying to decide on startups. Growth versus service quality. I think those are some of the elements that you need to consider. Okay. And feel free to type in questions in the chat. I guess I can also, if it's directly about that particular issue, I can also look at those and answer them in real time. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going and move on to the next question that we got, which was why startups with the same ideas can succeed while others don't. Okay, another very good question. Now, first of all, I think we should establish that from pretty much every startup company, there are going to be competing companies that have the same idea or similar ideas or attacking the same market. So, so I think it's important to understand what are some of the elements that might lead one to another. I mentioned the data network effect already, so that's actually something. That's nothing to do with the team. That's just a pure market jump on the market that happened to get you into a good position. So there's a lot of random noise that then turns around into being kind of a competitive advantage later on. And that would be one example. Another one could be just getting some big customers, and maybe if you're the first one to preempt or to get that customer, then they're not available for other competitors. Then of course you've got your team dynamics, your team knowledge, etc. And here, and this is why a lot of times you find that investors that are looking for scale really scrutinize team, because some of the people have experience growing a business and other ones won't, and so there's a lot to think about, a lot of moving parts to these things. So basically a team with a lot of experience, specifically market experience, business experience in that area, is actually quite good. Also, a cohesion of the team, the ambition level of the team, and you might also, I also talked about perfectionism. So it's depending on these different things. There can be lots of reasons why people with the same idea can execute better. And it could also be that you have control over some other resource, like you have access to a sales force that other guys don't have, and in which case that's also quite beneficial. Now in the startup realm, having access, maybe you got some early funding and that enabled you to nail some scarce resource that then other people would have a hard time getting. But I would say, generally speaking, there's going to be a lot of competition. There will be people working on the same ideas. Having a good, solid team with complementary skills is going to help you there. And having some people with experience in the startup realm, especially in growth areas, will help. And having a good, solid technical team will also help you quite a bit. And if you happen to get lucky and get some early resources, of course, that'll get you a clear bump over the competition as well. Let me see now. I think someone sent me. There were a couple questions here. Let's have a look. Question is, what are the key metrics you look at when assessing similar AI solutions? Okay, that's a good question. So specifically, with regard to AI as opposed to a startup, company, I think part of this could be, the idea that there could be a data network effect. So access to data and the idea that it's going to actually improve as you get early customers and you collect more data. The availability of data, saying, hey, I know where I can get it. I have access to it already. Now, if someone comes in and says, there's this great big database out there and it's so open to the public, and anyone can have it, that sounds great, because that's going to get you going, quickly, and you have access to it because it's open. But on the other hand, that's not a competitive advantage, right? Because everyone else is going to have access to that same data set. So when I say, so key metric is, what kinds of access to different kinds of data do you have? Do you have access at all or not? I'm thinking there might be a data set out there someplace. That's I would say that's a very weak position to be in as a startup company. Whereas if you say, well, I already know that there's 3 different kinds of data sources, and one is this big public data base, which we're going to merge with behavioral data that we're going to collect because we're going to put on some kind of device that tracks their heart rate or whatever. So then you've got a stronger, you have a much stronger case to have some kind of competitive advantage in that space. And the third thing, as I mentioned before, is some articulation of what are the data network effects, especially in a consumer-oriented business, but maybe even in a B2B space. Can you articulate why this, having more data as you go is going to improve the quality of your service and help you scale? Okay, so I think that's pretty much my quick answer to that particular question. Here's another question. Why does mid-level management generally not fully, why why is mid-level management generally not fully willing to jump into a great idea early on and creating an AI product in a company or early adoption of AI inside their product? How do we address this problem in large corporates? Okay, this is an excellent question, and this has to do a lot with sort of innovation culture in a big company. So we've been talking about startups so far. So we assume that in a startup company, you're going to jump in. It's your idea. You're going to bring on the teammates. They believe in the idea. Whereas in a big company, now you've got multiple points of friction here. And actually, I have an article about this. I'm not sure I gave it to you, but I will have a link to it that we'll send out, or maybe I'll put a link in the chat later on. And basically, there's just so many more friction points, in a big company. So people hate change. Just that's the quick answer. People hate change. Everyone wants to see change, but no one wants to change, basically. And so in a big company, you've got this traditional way of working, which is typically successful, And if companies in a crisis, they are quicker. Okay, yes. Let's try whatever it takes. Let's incorporate something. And let's try to experiment. But well-managed companies have an experimentation process in place so that they can fool around a little bit and try and come up with new things. And just to get past that hurdle is actually fairly tricky in many big companies. Most companies don't have that. Don't have those mechanisms whatsoever. Now, even if, as you point out, you develop something in-house, you may have a hard time convincing people that this is actually a really, really good thing. And again, you have, how do you scale this thing? It's an idea. So do you go through procurement processes from your big company? Do you go in and get the sales, CRM system and say, oh, I'm going to contact all these people with my little idea? The people, they react like, oh, you can't do that. You can't have access. What if you hurt our brand? Etc. So it's a very delicate operation when you have a new product, you're coming up with something new. Maybe you're changing one of your products. Maybe you have a different business model, and you start moving further and further away, and then you might conflict with, which is even worse, what's going on in the company. So if you can articulate your business case, typically when we talk about digital transformation projects, we say, articulate the business case first. Try and find some champions high up in the company, and hopefully the company has some kind of corporate venturing group that's well connected to the top of the company. And then try and convince them and socialize it to the stakeholders. What are some of the benefits, the monetary and non-monetary benefits for doing this particular, project? And then you have to try and figure out the way of working around the system to be able to test your idea, like a startup, like a venture, without having to go through all of the big infrastructure, that your company has, because you're going to get blocked every time you try and do it. So I would say it's a very delicate operation. It depends on the mentality of people in a big company. Some companies are very proactive. They have a whole group. They might even set up an incubator and look at startups and make investments in startups and maybe even incorporate them. And then other companies are more like walled fortresses. They don't want to have anything to do with the outside world, and those are the companies that are, eventually going to find themselves at a disadvantage, because sooner or later someone's going to adopt one of these things. And, it's going to maybe make a big cost reduction or something like that for a competing product, and then you're stuck because you weren't ready for it. So again, that's also part of the argumentation, when you're trying to, pull this off in a big company. But so overall, I would say, culture of experimentation. If absent that, try and find a champion, try and figure out how you can work with the different elements or work around the different elements in your company that are going to say no. Because again, and I mentioned this in my paper, in a startup, you keep going, everyone says no, 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 yes. Then finally someone says yes, and you can take it off. Whereas in a big company, everyone has to say yes. It's yes, 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 no. As soon as someone says no, then it's pretty much over. So it's a completely different mindset shift that you need to have, and a good company will try and encourage this sort of experimentation and try and get some tests out there and try and test new business models. And in some cases, it may mean actually testing it off-site, off-brand. And that's something that a big company can also do, like, in a case where it's really conflicting with the current business model. So that's my short answer to relatively short answer to that question. Okay, thoughts on data tokenization and impact on API economy. Okay, I'm going to hold that question for a few minutes if you don't mind, Ravi, because I'm going to take some topics in a certain order, and then we'll come back to this one. No probs. Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, can startups, the next question that I got was, can startups handle data collection, privacy, and legality while big techs are failing? Okay, that's another really, really good question. And I think we all pretty much agree that big companies are, they won't say completely abysmal, but I would say, mainly abysmal at protecting privacy because they have lax security. So you need to have security to enable privacy, right? I mean, that's the whole point of it, is you can keep private data private through some kind of security measures. And most big companies, not all, have very, very lax security, and most companies are quite open to attacks, especially social engineering attacks. So basically just calling somebody on the phone and saying, hey, I'm your boss's boss's boss. I need to know the password right now, kind of thing. It works a lot. And people get into these companies because of these sort of social engineering things, and then basically have all kinds of data breaches and whatnot. So what I would suggest that you look at to think about this question is, there was a pretty good article, and again I'll try and I'm going to try and send out or we'll figure out some way of communicating this, but there's a pretty good article called Privacy by Design by Burns. And basically what Burns argues in this article is that you can't be reactive. Like reactive privacy is bad. Remedial privacy is bad. So in other words, you wait for a data breach, you wait for ransomware, and then you try and figure out what to do. That's not good. Okay? What you need to be is proactive. And so the idea is to build in to your offer, to your products and your services, a strong element of privacy, so that privacy is preventative. And it should be the default. So in other words, the default interaction with somebody should be that they have privacy. And you'd have to do something special to say, no, I don't want privacy. I want less privacy. Okay? And something that reminds me of this a lot is Facebook, for example, their default privacy setting, it may still be, I don't even know, but for a long time, the default privacy setting was public. Okay? And so you actually had to do lots of things to go in and change your setting to make it so it was friends only on Facebook. And of course, the public setting was great for Facebook because it kind of got a bigger pool of people to commit to developing content for them, right? So you can see why they did it. But, it's actually kind of scary how much information people give out with their public settings, talking about when they're not home, talking about things that they're interested in, even medical issues. I wrote to some friend of mine. It's like, he said something like, "Oh, my sister has cancer, and I hope that this treatment works for her," or something like this. And it's a public setting, like everybody. So I actually wrote to him and said, I don't know if you know this, but that's for anybody in the world, and they don't even need a Facebook account to see that post that you just made, And I don't know what your sister's insurance company is like, But that could have severe implications, because guess what? Insurance companies can scan through Facebook. They do it now. They scan through Facebook posts to determine what your premium is going to be. So it's you want to have it as the default is to be private, and then you want to make it in the design. So when you're actually you're working on a company, you should think at the very beginning, how is this going to, what's the privacy element here? What's the security element here? How is it going to work? How can we embed it into the design? Of course, and the article goes on and on and on, but I think that gives you a little idea about the kinds of things that you need to think about when you're thinking about privacy, and it also gives you some idea why a startup might actually have better privacy than a big company, because if you build this in from the very, very beginning, then you're more likely to be able to have a better response and prevent breaches and other sorts of privacy violations later on. Okay, let's move on now to credit scoring using machine learning. There was another question, like, can you talk a little bit about credit scoring using machine learning? So credit scoring is a very interesting problem. So you're basically trying to decide whether a person or a business should receive a loan typically. And your idea is to try and figure out, is this person going to pay back the loan? So that's the main that's the main point behind credit scoring. And I can't remember if we talked about this in the video. So feel free to pop it in the chat if you've already heard this part of it. But basically, up until now, the main credit scoring feature has been like your salary or something like this. What's your salary? And those are the things that go into your credit score. Like you have these official credit score, these bureaus that produce credit scores for individuals. And the same thing happens for businesses. There are, like looking at the overall assets of the business, et cetera. Let's think about individuals for right now. It's a little easier. But the analogy is directly the same for companies as well. So the idea would be, okay, what's your job? What is your salary like? How much money do you want to borrow? Have you paid off loans in the past, et cetera. So that's kind of your basic financial information that goes into these credit scores. Now, what people started getting smart on more recently is, gee, I wonder if we could automate this, and if we could come up with a better system for making credit scores. And of course, the first thing that people thought of was, hey, maybe we can grab social, so then we can start using some kind of prediction model, right, to grab social media data. Since everybody's giving away all their data for free anyway, we can look and see what kinds of friends this person has, for example. And then we can make some kind of estimate. We might be able to actually look at some of their credit scores, believe it or not. And then we can determine whether this person is a good credit risk. And this actually, and you could combine that with salary data or whatever. So that's fine. Now, this actually turns out to be an improvement as far as I understand, but it's not a great improvement. It actually didn't predict much better than your plain old, just give us your financial information. Because typically on social media, you don't know how connected two people are. So indeed, it's true that if your social network in real life includes people who don't pay back loans, you're probably not going to pay back a loan either. That's true. But the problem is you don't really know which of your friends are actually really, really good friends, and which ones are influencing your behavior, and which ones are just random acquaintances that you don't even know. So that's the part that people started. Then what they started looking at, and actually Dave Schreier did create a company around this idea with Alexander Lipton. Which is basically, can you look at somebody's cell phone data? Can you actually, can you actually grab the location? Oh, people started looking at credit card, like the last X credit card transactions you have is actually a very high predictor of whether you can pay back a loan, believe it or not. Like the last 10. It's not even a huge number. And the same thing then can apply to your phone location data. And this is something else that also Alexander Pentland at MIT was working on. So if like it's a very small number. I can't remember what the number is off the top of my head, but it's something like, the last 5 locations that you had on your cell phone is like a very good predictor of whether you can pay back a loan. So when you talk about, machine learning for credit score, you're just looking for patterns, and it turns out that that's one of the patterns, that is highly predictive of individual consumers' ability to pay back loans. And so that you can see how these sorts of things are different data, things that you wouldn't have necessarily thought about as being part of your financial planning ability or something like this, could actually be a predictor of your financial, resources and ability to pay back loans. So that's essentially how credit scoring, machine learning credit scoring works. You're looking at sort of, you might have some theory about something that might be correlated with the ability to pay back a loan, and then you kind of test that a little bit and look for patterns, and then see if that applies well, and if it does, then you could actually build it out to a bigger scale. Same thing could apply to corporate loans that banks could apply, that could use for corporate loans. Of course, they wouldn't be using necessarily social media data or cell phone data, but there could be other indicators to look for to try and come up with a better model of which companies are more likely to, pay back their loans, or startup companies, or pay back their bonds. Okay, here's a question or a comment here. Based on one of my previous experiences in NPIs in the AI space, my takeaway was that it is necessary and super important to start with descriptive AI, and then start off into an actual solution for the problem, doing a prediction or a prescriptive AI. Completely agree with that. In general, what a lot of people would say is you need to do a lot of data wrangling. It's actually very important, because first of all, you discover all kinds of bad data, People putting in percentages. I mean, it actually happened to me, people typing in percentages like 75, and other people typing in 0.75, and they both mean the same thing, 75%. But, one is 2 orders of magnitude higher than the other, and half your data is in one, and half in the other. So you discover lots of things when you're doing these sorts of data cleaning and data engineering. Super, super important. Then the question is, what are you trying to do when you're making a prescription? You're trying to say, what should we do? And so it's quite important to actually just get some description going first, and then you may have some theories about what's causing it, and then you can go out. Now, of course, some people just go out and get random things too, like the phase of the moon, or whatever. Does it affect the ability of someone to pay back a loan? Does the phase of the, that's interesting. But of course, if your data set's big enough, you're going to find some correlations in there. So, in general, I think that you're right, is that you should have some theory, while you're doing these sort of developing your models and you're developing your predictions and prescriptions. It should be, generally speaking, guided by some theory. And, that will also help you try and decide what kind of algorithm you want to use. Like the ones that are like unsupervised neural network type things typically, are very empirically based. They're not really very theory based, and you might think that's a great thing, but you think about these COVID treatments, like the people trying to diagnose COVID-19 using other mechanisms, besides the swab tests and things like this. And then they ended up, like doing an unsupervised neural network, and then, getting all these crazy results, false positives and false negatives. And somebody looked into this. I just read an article about this recently. It's actually very fascinating. And some of the things that was triggering that positive or negative was the font that was used in certain hospitals where there are lots of cases. So in other words, you're looking for patterns. You're looking for anything you could throw in everything that you've got, and then you pick up on this pattern. Hey, this font is correlated with people being sick. But actually, there's no theory behind that. That's a purely empirical observation, and it doesn't generalize very well. So I would say that's why you typically people. I mean, it's good to try things like that. I'm not saying don't try it, but it's also good to do a descriptive model. Try and come up with a theory. Try and figure out where you want to go and collect data, and then go out and look for it, and maybe supplementing with some other random stuff that that you're not really sure. But to have some ideas, like this whole thing about the credit scoring is, hey, I have an idea. Social media data. It might be useful for, I think, it's credible. It turned out that in real life, it wasn't as useful as we thought it was going to be. But that was something that had to be tested, empirically. Okay. Now, there's another question here, which is, what are the tools to be used to apply AI to fighting financial crime? And it's kind of a very specific question, but, there are, let's just say, lots of different elements of financial crime. I think the biggest ones are what they call money laundering, anti-money laundering. So people trying to evade taxes or trying to take criminal activities and cash out, so that they have like sort of money that's identified as being, illegally gotten, and trying to convert that, even at a loss, to money that no one knows, that's clean money, So I don't know a lot of the details on this, but I do know a little bit about, for example, know your customer. That's one of the rules that a lot of countries and jurisdictions have put in, is to say that you have to know who your customers are. You can't just have like random people open up bank accounts or whatever to move money around without having some traceability back to a person. Okay, and so what does that mean? Well, a lot of the big banks were very heavy-handed about it, and they basically said, yeah, you come to our office. And by the way, I opened up an account in the UK, a couple years ago, and it was just, I had to get a real one because I was trying to get a, mortgage, or, trying to rent a house or something, So I needed a bank account in the UK, So they're like, fine. Come to our branch. It's on a website. Okay, great. How do I get an appointment? So I go to the branch, and it's locked, and they say, send us a message, call us on this line, and you have to make an appointment. And by the way, appointments aren't for another month or something like this. So I, okay. So I call them, and then I go, long story short, I had to jump through lots of hoops. I had to go to the eventually I got to a physical office. I met a real person. They took my passport. They looked at me. They looked at my passport. They went and made all kinds of photocopies of everything. They made me fill in something on like a tablet, which I could have easily done, before I even got there. So I did it. I filled in everything. And then they eventually sent me a letter by post and said, oh, okay, you got a bank account now. So what a lot of companies have done in the fintech space is just to eliminate this. You can upload your, you basically do it in 5 minutes. And so basically they're detecting facial features from your passport photo, looking at your passport. It's got all kinds of watermarks in it. You hold up your phone. In some cases, some companies will ask you to make a short video saying, hey, say your name and your date of birth or something like that. And then they're going to analyze your facial features and determine that you're the same person that's on your passport. Therefore, getting traceability, therefore, know the customer, and that's just as good as all their stuff. So part of this is know your customer. Then there's a bunch of other things that people have looked for, which is about so-called AML, or anti-money laundering provisions. And these are basically looking for patterns where people make suspicious transactions. And that, of course, requires a lot of training, and fraudulent transactions are fairly small in number relative to the whole thing. So there's a kind of special class of problems where you have, only one positive out of, million observations or something like this, So you have to think about, there's different ways that people approach this problem, basically looking for patterns, trying to find training data on known money laundering cases. You might actually do things like breaking a big transaction into a bunch of small pieces, and that could trigger flags because, why are you trying to break this into small chunks? It could be a technical issue, like your bank only makes you put 10,000 pounds or less on a one transfer or something. But it could be that you did it intentionally because you know that in that particular country, anything over 10,000 pounds gets reported to someone else, and therefore, so you slice it and do these things. So these are the kinds of patterns that people look for, and basically applying AI to these patterns to try and come up with better mechanisms for trying to detect a case, a relatively rare case, but a case of money laundering. Okay, next question. Can the same AI algorithms have good results in different industries? And I think the answer to that question is yes. I don't really fully get the idea. I mean, there's every industry is, has its own specificities. So it's you can't say. I mean, I can't. Could you use the same algorithms? There's all these different pattern matching algorithms, things like this, deep learning algorithms. I guess those are the kinds of things. And the question is, could it be useful in multiple industries? And the answer is yes, it could be, and it can also be successful in one and fail in another. And it can also be successful in one and a failure in the same industry. And that was the case. I think I mentioned the case of the IBM Watson in these two different cancer centers. That's even in the same sector using the same algorithms. And actually not having very good generalizability. And then you've got things like taking things from virtual reality and trying to apply it to like a physical showroom or something like this. So there's lots of different ways that you could have in different sectors. Applying the same technique and have it work well and have it not work so well. It's more of what are you trying to predict on here, And again, that gets us back to that question that we had about the descriptive AI. It's sort of like taking it, applying it to the problem that you have. Think about the problem, and the problem could be pattern matching. It could be looking for patterns, and so that's going to be working quite well for both know your customer as well as for chat bots or something like that. So there, that's fine. But I'd rather not start with the algorithm or start with different kinds of solutions. I'd rather start with the problem and then try and tailor the problem, to the correct algorithm. If you can, once you've thought that through very carefully. Okay, now. That's all the questions that you guys prepared in advance. I am happy to keep going now on your Q&A in the chat. And if I don't understand you, then I might call on you to talk a little bit more and amplify your question. So here's one. In terms of potential AI bias risks, this may be interesting. Oh, anyone working in anti-fin crime. Oh, great. Thank you very much for that chat, for that link. Without clicking on it, I can say that there could be different biases, there could be different generalizability issues in financial crimes. And of course, right now we have this, real overreaction and overreach by the U.S., government, the U.S. IRS, where everybody is living overseas as a criminal until proven innocent, and so you can see how you might make different kinds of false positives and false negatives when trying to do these sorts of anti-money laundering investigations. Okay, let's see now. Anybody else have a question here? I think there was a question about, let's see, let me find out here. Data tokenization. Okay. Oh, here's another message here too. Yes. Well, thank you very much for repeating. I found it. What are your thoughts on data tokenization and its potential impact on the API economy and potential impact on the growth of AI solutions in the future? Maybe you could just say a few words about that, Ravi, and explain where you're coming from in terms of API and API's economy, API economy.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thank you for answering my question. So my thinking around this was as we go towards Web 3.0 business models, the where the data sits and whether it's the user or it's been privately stored, what we've seen in the last 10-20 years is data has become open. We're using it, we give it away more freely, but as there's more mechanisms to be able to store that data in, say, a more structured manner, say on a blockchain with private permissions, could we see that potential data that was really open now become more closed and start being used within smaller circles for specific use cases? And then as a result, could that impact future AI solutions as there won't be as much data to test potentially new AI solutions with?
Okay, that's a very interesting thought. I haven't thought much about this. I think that encryption and tokenization are both are two different approaches to keeping data private in some sense. And the question is there going to be less of a chance to work with open data that's out there? I think that in general, encryption shouldn't be too much of an issue for aggregating data. It's more like an end-to-end encryption type thing, so that basically, yeah, maybe you're not going to be able to go out and grab a data set, and maybe you have to have some, there'll be more control over how the data are used. I think that's probably true, especially when it comes to personal data. I don't know about like a thermometer someplace or something like that. It's probably a little bit less relevant to this. But I think that personal data probably will have more controls over it. And you're right, that might make it more difficult to get some kind of scale and to get some kind of data network effect going in future. Now, I'm not quite clear on the API element of this, because an API, can be a private, it's an agreement that you have between, any two parties, like an open banking API, for example. And banks will say, hey, if you need to send money to this bank, here's the kind of format that I like it in. So the encryption or tokenization of data shouldn't technically be an issue there, unless you have something else in mind, which I'm happy to discuss.
Yeah, no, I guess I was coming from like if with that, I guess will we start seeing more API marketplaces, for example, as a result, because there'll be more controls around data? Will we need more essentially a marketplace to help essentially guard and essentially standardize and know that data? If we go towards something which is more permissioned based.
Right. Yep, I completely agree with you. I think that's already happening. That's been happening for like the last 5 years or so. And indeed, I think that APIs are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And in fact, it's actually a quite interesting problem that you raise. Because go ahead.
Because I thought it would be, for example, I have an organization, I have some information and you have some information. Now, in the past, maybe, we would have gone through a big tech company may have held that, but I may choose to work with your organization to exchange data. So I may give you something, and then that creates more private networks of data, but those who are in those networks benefit from more information. So it's essentially,
exactly.
And that's going towards a more permissioned data ecosystem as opposed to an open data ecosystem.
Yes. And this is something that we actually tackled. We organized a couple months ago a hackathon at Imperial. And one of the challenges was indeed exactly this challenge. We are moving more and more toward an API situation for data exchange, especially in finance, but not exclusively in finance. You can also imagine this is going to be very big in healthcare as well, or any kind of data intensive sectors. And how can we automate this process, or how can we think about when you have so many different APIs out there? How can we basically aggregate them or negotiate them in a more scalable way than just simply a one-off negotiation for every single party? So it's actually creating a kind of a tricky situation, because indeed I think that we're moving more and more toward this permissioned type access, and it's definitely going to cause some kind of hiccups along the way. But once we have it, I think we'll be much more secure, and it'll be much quicker. Just like open banking has helped a lot with the efficiency of payment systems, for example.
Yep. Thank you.
Sure. Any other question or comment that anyone has today? Okay. All good. Then I think let me just see where we are in the schedule here. Well, I think we're actually pretty on time. So I think we'll stop here unless anyone has any last minute questions. I'm going to try and find the two articles I mentioned. One is my article about lean startup and open innovation in big companies and why it's difficult. And the second one was the article on privacy by design. And I will send those along, I think, to the program team at Esme Learning. And then they can circulate those for those of you who are interested in those topics. Okay. Thanks a lot for your attention, guys. And I really appreciate you showing up today and participating with the chat, and also by sending in questions in advance. So looking forward to the next time.